For over 1,000 years, the Vizeri have stood as the moral compass of the galaxy. They are not rulers, nor conquerors, nor warriors. They have never built fleets of warships, never raised armies, never spilled blood. And yet, when they speak, entire civilizations listen. Their influence is not born from power, but from wisdom. When conflict arises, it is the Vizeri who mediate peace. When war looms, it is their voice that calls for reason. When empires stand on the brink of destruction, it is their guidance that prevents annihilation. Their words alone have stopped more wars than all the treaties in galactic history combined. To the rest of the galaxy, the Vizeri are more than a species. They are an ideal, a shining example of what civilization can become when violence is left behind. And so, when the Korthak Dominion calls for judgment on humanity, the decision falls, as it always has, to them. The Korthak Dominion, a brutal and ancient empire, sees humanity as a dangerous anomaly. Unlike most young species who bend to superior force, humanity refuses to kneel. They are defiant, stubborn, and worst of all, they inspire others to resist. Already, border worlds and oppressed colonies whisper of humanity's courage, of their unwillingness to break. The Korthak do not fear humanity's strength, they fear its influence. And so, they come before the Galactic Council with a simple demand. Humanity is a threat to peace. The Vizeri must condemn them. It is not the first time a species has been judged. Many before have been labeled aggressors and cast out, their expansion halted, their allies abandoning them for fear of being seen as complicit. If the Vizeri denounce humanity, the rest of the galaxy will follow. Trade agreements will dissolve. Political support will vanish. Neutral species will turn their backs. Without allies, humanity will be isolated, vulnerable, easy to erase. The council chambers, a vast hall of 100 species, fall silent as the Vizeri delegation steps forward. The Vizeri leader, an elder named Saran, gazes across the assembly with calm, unblinking eyes. He has guided peace for centuries. He has spoken words that shaped the fate of empires. And now, his next words will decide the future of humanity itself. Everyone expects him to condemn them. Humanity is warlike, after all. Even now, they fight. They refuse submission. They rebel against the forces that seek to control them. The Vizeri have always stood against war. It is only logical that they will denounce the humans. But Saran does not speak immediately. He studies the council, then humanity's representatives, who stand alone, awaiting their fate. Then, finally, he speaks. No. The single word ripples through the chamber like a shockwave. Murmurs rise into shouts. The Korthak delegation stiffens in disbelief. The Vizeri have never refused a judgment before. Saran raises a hand, silencing the uproar. His next words will change the course of history. Humanity is not a danger to peace. Humanity is its last hope. The council chamber erupted into chaos. Delegates from 100 species shouted over one another, their voices merging into a storm of disbelief, fury, and confusion. The Vizeri had spoken, but no one could comprehend what they had just heard. For centuries, the Vizeri had been the keepers of peace, the moral foundation of the Galactic Council. Their word was final. When they declared a species dangerous, that species was shunned. When they called for diplomacy, war fleets stood down. No one had ever questioned their wisdom, because they had never been wrong. And yet now, in front of the entire galaxy, they had refused to condemn humanity. Worse still, they had defended them. The Korthak delegation was the first to recover. Their leader, High Warlord Karish, a towering brute of muscle and plated scales, slammed his fist against the stone podium, sending a deep reverberation through the chamber. His black eyes burned with rage. "This is madness," Karish snarled. "The Vizeri have spent 1,000 years standing against violence, and now you defend the most violent species in the stars." Saran, the Vizeri elder, did not flinch. He stood calmly as a wave of accusations followed Karish's outburst. "The humans have built war fleets. They refuse to obey the council's authority. They destroy the Encheri dominion when they tried to subjugate them. Saran raised a hand, and despite the chaos, the room fell silent. His voice, though soft, carried the weight of centuries. "You are wrong," he said simply. A murmur of confusion spread through the chamber. Saran continued, his gaze steady. "Humanity has not waged war for conquest. They have not sought to dominate the weak or expand their influence through fear. They fight, yes, but not for power. They fight to defend, to protect, to stand where others have fallen." His words sent another ripple through the room. Many scoffed, but others hesitated. The Vizieri did not lie. They had no need for deception. If Saran believed this, there was reason to question everything they had assumed about humanity. Karish's voice was sharp with disbelief. "They are primitives with a lust for war. Even now, they resist our rule. They refuse to submit to order." Saran met his glare with unwavering calm. "If they were primitives, they would have accepted your rule. Submission is the way of the weak. Defiance is the way of the strong. And strength, when guided by wisdom, does not bring destruction. It brings balance." Karish bared his fangs. "This is treachery. If you will not denounce them, then you have chosen a side." A heavy silence filled the chamber. Saran did not blink. "Yes," he said, "we have." The meaning was unmistakable. The most peaceful species in the galaxy had just taken a stand for humanity. And the galaxy would never be the same. The silence that followed Saran's words was heavier than any warship. For the first time in recorded history, the Vizieri had declared a side. The most peaceful species in the galaxy, the very symbol of neutrality, had broken their tradition of non-involvement, and they had done so for humanity. A species many considered reckless, defiant, and dangerous. The weight of the moment pressed upon every delegate in the chamber. Some species looked to one another, uncertainty in their expressions. The Vizieri had never made a mistake before. If they believed in humanity, was it possible that the rest of the galaxy had misjudged them? Karish, however, did not hesitate. His fury boiled over, his deep voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "Then you are fools," he growled, his sharp teeth bared. "You believe these humans will bring balance. They are a disease. They do not know peace. They will infect the stars with their defiance, and when they have no more enemies, they will turn on you." Saran did not waver. "You fear them because they will not kneel to you." The Korthak warlord slammed his fist against the podium again, cracking the stone. "We demand a formal ruling. If the Vizieri will not act, then let the council decide. We will put it to a vote. Humanity must be contained before they bring war to every corner of the stars." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. The Vizieri's word held great weight, but the council was still a governing body, and the Korthak had allies. If enough species agreed, humanity could still be declared a threat. Saran remained calm. He had expected this. He turned his gaze to the council members, his voice steady and composed. "Before you vote, I ask you this. Do any of you fear humanity itself? Have they sent fleets to your borders? Have they threatened your colonies? Have they demanded your surrender?" A heavy silence followed. No one spoke, because the truth was undeniable. Humanity had done none of those things. They had fought, yes, but only against those who sought to control them. The humans had not expanded through force. They had not conquered the weak. They had not sought war for war's sake. Saran continued, "The Korthak would have you believe that humanity is dangerous, that their resistance to tyranny makes them a threat. But I ask you, who is truly dangerous? The ones who demand obedience, or the ones who refuse to bow?" Several species shifted in their seats, the doubt growing in their minds. For the first time, many began to wonder if they had been misled. The Korthak had spoken of humanity as reckless, but now it was the Dominion who seemed desperate. Karish's claws dug into the stone, his patience fraying. "Enough of this. We will not stand for their corruption to spread. If this council will not act, then the Korthak will." And with that, the warlord stormed out of the chamber. The battle for humanity's fate had just begun. The council chamber remained tense long after Warlord Karish's departure. The Korthak delegation followed him, their armored forms striding out with barely concealed rage. But their absence did not bring relief, it brought uncertainty. The Vizieri had taken an unprecedented stand. The Korthak had declared their intent to act, with or without the council's approval. And the rest of the galaxy was left in the middle, unsure which path to take. The human delegation, silent until now, finally spoke. Ambassador Elias Carter, humanity's representative, stepped forward. Unlike most species present, he wore no elaborate robes, no decorative insignia of power. Just a simple uniform, its fabric unadorned but crisp, a symbol of a species that had never relied on grandeur to command respect. His voice was calm, steady. "We have heard the accusations against us," he said, his gaze sweeping across the chamber. "We have been called dangerous, uncontrollable, a threat to peace." He let the words hang for a moment before continuing. "We won't deny that we fight. We have fought. We fought against those who would enslave us, against those who sought to break us, against those who believed we should kneel simply because they were stronger." He paused, his eyes locking onto the remaining delegates. "But tell me, when has humanity ever waged war for conquest? When have we expanded our borders through force, taken from those weaker than us, or demanded fealty from those who wished only to live in peace?" Again, silence. Because the truth was undeniable. The history of the stars was filled with empires that had conquered, that had enslaved, that had crushed opposition beneath iron boots. The Korthak dominion, the Encheri hegemony, even the once mighty Voran Imperium, all had built their strength on the bones of those too weak to resist. Humanity, however, had built alliances. They had turned enemies into partners. They had fought not for expansion, but for freedom. They had never demanded servitude, only the right to stand as equals. Saran, watching from the Vizieri delegation, finally spoke. "We have spent centuries believing that true peace could only be achieved through the absence of conflict," he said. "We thought war was the enemy, that those who fought were lost to their baser instincts." His gaze softened. "We were wrong." Murmurs spread through the chamber. The Vizieri, admitting fault. The very notion was unthinkable. Saran continued. "Peace is not merely the absence of war. It is the presence of justice. It is the will to stand when others would fall. And it is the refusal to bow when faced with tyranny." His eyes met Carter's. "Humanity does not fight for power. They fight because they must. And for the first time in our history, we understand. True peace cannot exist without those willing to defend it." A hush fell over the chamber. The choice before them was no longer just about humanity. It was about what kind of galaxy they wanted to live in. And the war for that future was about to begin. The moment Saran finished speaking, the weight of his words settled over the chamber like a silent storm. The Vizieri, the most respected and peaceful species in the galaxy, had just declared that peace without justice was meaningless. That humanity, the very species so many feared, was not a danger, but a necessity. And not everyone in the chamber agreed. One of the first to stand was Chancellor Vereen of the Mixeri Trade Union, her scaled crest flaring with unease. "You speak as if we must choose between humanity and the Dominion," she said carefully, her voice practiced and diplomatic. "But must we not also consider what defying the Korthak will bring? They hold vast fleets. If we oppose them, we may invite war on a scale we have never seen." Another voice joined hers. Ambassador Julik of the Zenari Republic, his furred features drawn tight. "Perhaps the Korthak are right in one regard. Humanity is dangerous, not because they seek war, but because they refuse to be conquered. If the Dominion sees them as a threat, they will not hesitate to erase them. And I, for one, do not wish to be caught in the fire." Murmurs of agreement spread through the chamber. Fear, uncertainty, and pragmatism battled against principle. Many had no love for the Dominion, but fewer still had the courage to stand against them. Then Carter spoke again. His voice was measured, but the fire beneath it was undeniable. "So that's it?" he asked, his gaze sweeping across the room. "You call yourselves leaders, visionaries, civilized species, and yet you would stand aside and let tyranny go unchallenged. You fear war, so you will choose surrender instead." His words struck deep. Even those who had spoken against humanity hesitated, the shame of his accusation evident. Carter took a step forward, his presence filling the chamber. "Humanity has never asked for war. We have never sought to expand our borders, to rule over others. We do not fight because we enjoy it. We fight because history has taught us one undeniable truth." His jaw tightened. "There is always someone who wants to rule over others. There is always someone who demands obedience. And when good people do nothing, when the fearful stay silent, tyrants win." The chamber remained deathly still. Then Saren spoke, his voice calm but resolute. "The Vezeri will not be silent." A moment later, another voice joined him. "Neither will the Talrith consortium," rumbled an elder from the back of the chamber. One by one, voices rose. The Silari Federation, the Drenvok Assembly, the Lokari Free States, species that had once hesitated now found their courage. But many remained silent. The Mixeri, the Zenari, others who feared the consequences more than they valued freedom. The lines had been drawn, and outside the chamber, the Korthak fleets were already preparing for war. Word spread through the galaxy like wildfire. The Vezeri had taken a side. The council was fractured, and the Korthak Dominion, unwilling to tolerate defiance, was already moving. The attack came without warning. On the neutral world of Vornor 7, a border colony where diplomats and merchants from across the stars met in fragile peace, the skies darkened as Korthak warships descended. Their arrival was not preceded by negotiations, not tempered by demands. There was no ultimatum, only fire. The first bombardment reduced the outer settlements to dust. The second wave deployed Korthak soldiers, their armored forms cutting through the panicked resistance with brutal efficiency. They did not distinguish between combatants and civilians. To them, the message was clear. Those who stood with humanity would be eradicated. The attack was swift, merciless, and it was meant to be a warning. The footage reached the Galactic Council within hours. Cities burning. Unarmed civilians gunned down in the streets. Smoke rising from the ruins of a once thriving colony. The Dominion had not simply declared war, they had made it personal. Inside the emergency chamber, the remaining delegates watched in horror as the images played. Saran closed his eyes. He had hoped, foolishly, that the Dominion would hesitate before resorting to open slaughter. But the Korthak did not deal in half measures. If they could not force the galaxy into submission, they would terrorize it instead. Across the room, Elias Carter stood with his arms crossed, his face unreadable as the final image flickered out. A child, no older than 6, clutching a broken piece of a Vezeri-crafted peace emblem, a symbol that had once promised safety. Now, it was just another shattered relic. Finally, Carter spoke. His voice was quiet, but there was an edge to it, a cold, determined steel. "We warned you," he said. "We told you what would happen if you let tyrants act unchecked. Now the Korthak have shown you exactly what they are." No one argued. No one dared. Saran exhaled. "The Vezeri will not stand idly by. If the Council will not act, then we will." Carter met his gaze. "Neither will humanity." Others hesitated. Some, like the Mixeri, still wavered. But those who had already chosen a side, those who had seen the truth, stood firm. The galaxy had reached its breaking point. The Korthak believed they had made an example of Vornor 7. That fear would force their enemies into silence. But they had made a mistake. They had proven that the Vezeri had been right. That peace without those willing to defend it was an illusion. And now, for the first time in history, the most peaceful species in the galaxy was preparing for war. The stars burned with tension. For the first time in recorded history, the Viseri were preparing for war. Their fleets, long designed only for defense and humanitarian missions, were being retrofitted for battle. Their soldiers, once trained solely for peacekeeping, now armed themselves for something far greater. And at the heart of it all stood humanity. On the bridge of the Erebus, one of humanity's warships, Ambassador Elias Carter watched the holographic display as battle groups from across the galaxy assembled. Viseri cruisers, sleek and elegant, moved alongside the angular destroyers of the Tal'Reth. The Lokari, known more for their commerce than combat, had mobilized blockade runners to disrupt Korthak supply lines. Even the reluctant Mixari had sent scouting units, unwilling to stand entirely aside. But it was the humans who stood at the vanguard. Saran stood beside Carter, his eyes filled with quiet contemplation. "This is not our way," he admitted, "but I understand now why it must be done." Carter nodded. The Korthak made sure of that. He gestured to the display. They thought fear would win, that by burning one world, they could make the rest of the galaxy kneel. His voice hardened. They were wrong. A voice crackled through the comms. "Enemy fleet detected. They're coming." The Korthak had wasted no time. A massive force surged toward them, blotting out the stars. The Dominion had relied on one truth for centuries. That fear was the ultimate weapon. That when faced with overwhelming power, civilizations would submit rather than fight. But this time, their enemy wasn't afraid. Carter turned to Saran. "Are you ready?" The Vesari elder took a deep breath. "No," he admitted. Then his expression hardened. "But I will not run." Carter allowed himself a small smile. "Good answer." The battle began with a fury. Korthak warships unleashed their opening salvos, streams of plasma and kinetic rounds tearing through the void. But for the first time in their history, they faced an enemy that did not retreat. Humanity struck first, their warships diving into the chaos with brutal efficiency. They fought like they always had, not with overwhelming numbers, but with sheer, unrelenting will. Viseri support ships shielded their allies, providing cover as Tal'Reth interceptors shredded Dominion fighters. Lokari blockade runners weaved through enemy formations, disrupting supply chains and communications. The Dominion had expected compliance. What they got was defiance. On the surface of a contested moon, Viseri peacekeepers fought side by side with human marines. They had once sworn to never take a life. But as they watched the Korthak burn entire settlements, something in them changed. They no longer saw battle as a failure of diplomacy. They saw it as justice, and they did not falter. For the first time in the galaxy's history, war was not fought for power or conquest. It was fought for something far greater, and humanity stood at its heart. The void burned with the fury of war. Korthak warships, once thought invincible, buckled under the relentless assault. Humanity's fleet carved through their ranks with precision, their warships moving like a well-honed blade. The Viseri, once the embodiment of neutrality, stood firm beside them, their vessels shielding allies and striking where the enemy was weakest. For the first time in history, the Dominion was on the defensive. On the command bridge of the Erebus, Carter watched the tide shift. Reports flooded in. Tal'Reth forces had overrun a Dominion supply station, cutting off reinforcements. Lokari ships had crippled enemy logistics, forcing them into disarray. And on the surface of Vornar 7's sister colony, Viseri peacekeepers, no longer just diplomats, fought with unshakable resolve. Yet the Korthak were not defeated. Not yet. Warlord Karish himself led the final assault, his flagship, the Blood Oath, pushing through the fray. He refused to accept defeat. He had ruled through strength, crushed worlds beneath his heel. The idea that mere humans, that a coalition of lesser species, could stand against the Dominion was unthinkable. His voice snarled over the comms, filled with rage and desperation. You think you've won. You think this changes anything. The strong rule. That is the way of the stars. Carter's reply was calm, unwavering. Not anymore. At that moment, the Viserid Dreadnought Pax Eternal unleashed a focused energy beam, tearing through the Blood Oath's shields. Human torpedoes followed, puncturing the warlord's flagship, the great Korathak warship, once a symbol of their absolute dominance, shuddered, burning from within. Karish's final transmission was a roar of fury, then silence. His flagship detonated, the shockwave rippling through the battlefield. The remaining Dominion forces, seeing their leader fall, faltered. Some tried to flee, but there was nowhere left to run. Humanity and its allies pressed the advantage, forcing surrender after surrender. The battle was over. The Korathak Dominion, once the most feared power in the galaxy, had been broken. Silence fell over the comms. The war was done. Saran exhaled slowly, staring at the wreckage of Karish's fleet. I never imagined. He trailed off, shaking his head. Carter glanced at him. That the Viserid would fight. Saran nodded. That we needed to. The Viserid had always believed peace was an ideal achieved through neutrality. But now they understood. Peace was something that had to be defended. And on that day, they had stood with humanity. The galaxy would never be the same again. Humanity had not just won a war. They had changed the course of history. And this time, tyranny had lost.